Gambling Act 2005 Monetary Limits for Lotteries Bill, second reading.
Now, Wendy Chamberlain. Yeah. Thank you. Please don't walk in front. The member about to speak. I hope they're going to apologise walking round the chamber. No need now. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the Gambling Act 2005 Monetary Limits for Lotteries Bill now be read a second time. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a small and on the surface technical-looking bill, but one that would revolutionise charity fundraising in constituencies up and down the country. And looking at the bill itself, the key clause is number 1, subsection 2, to omit subsection 3 from section 99 of the Gambling Act 2005. The law being changed here is a requirement placed on charity lotteries alone that caps the proceeds of their sales in any given year. Put another way, if you're running a purely profit-driven lottery with no societal benefit, there are no caps on the amount of tickets that you can sell. But for charity lotteries, the most well-known of which being the People's Postcode Lottery, there is a cap of £5 million per draw and £50 million over the course of a calendar year. What Clause 1, subsection 2 does, and this is indeed the purpose of this whole bill, is to remove that cap and allow unlimited charitable fundraising from licensed lottery sales. Because, of course, it's important, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the proceeds of the lottery do go to charities rather than just creating bigger and bigger prize pots. And as things stand, there is a limit of £25,000, or if more, 10% of the proceeds of the lottery. Therefore, there is up to £500,000 with the current cap. All the stakeholders agree that we ought to be amending subsection 4 of section 99 so that it reads £500,000 to maintain those current prize levels. And my bill seeks the government's agreement to this and asks them to exercise their powers under clause 3 of the bill to make the relevant consequential provisions. So, Madam Speaker, that is the extent of the bill. 2 small legislative changes with a huge consequence for charities across the UK. There are approximately 500 charity lottery operators currently generating over £450 million for good causes every year. And as I've mentioned, the largest of these is the People's Postcode Lottery, and indeed it's the one with the largest reach in every constituency. And to date, the People's Postcode Lottery has coped with the demand exceeding the cap by establishing different postcode trusts that each operate on a thematic or geographical basis. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would argue there are 3 fundamental problems with this. First, it's incredibly bureaucratic, with each trust having to have its own licences, monthly returns, registrations under Scottish and English and Welsh law, trustees, audit and risk committees, monthly and annual accounts, financial audits, websites and so on. This bureaucracy increases costs that could otherwise be getting used for good causes. And secondly, it's deeply inflexible, with funds raised under each trust being required to be directed to the trust theme or geographical designation. Right now, we see Storm Eowyn causing destruction over Northern Ireland and Scotland, and depending on the damage, or if we saw some sort of major accident causing loss of life, charities, as they always do, would be stepping in to urgently provide support. But the People's Postcode Lottery, for example, wouldn't be able to divert funds to assist with such efforts because of the rules that currently exist around the trusts as a result of the cap. And third, even if you accept the additional bureaucracy and accept the restrictions on where funds are deployed, at the end of the day, all the evidence still shows that fundraising has been limited by these caps, the values of which is in any case eroded by inflation. Indeed, it is estimated, Madam Deputy Speaker, that if we do nothing and keep these caps today, that charities supported by the People's Postcode Lottery would lose out on £175 million over the next 5 years. And I would challenge anyone in this House to argue that the charities in their constituencies wouldn't benefit from seeing this funding come to them instead. And I know that we benefit already in North East Fife, and I'd love to see more support for fantastic local initiatives. These are some of the individual projects, Madam Deputy Speaker, that have been supported in the last 2 years alone. St Agatha's and St Andrew's nurseries received funds for the cost of outdoor education equipment and training. Support for Scotland's International Poetry Festival, Stanzas, which takes place in St Andrews every year, and indeed I'm looking forward to March's programme. The Newborough Wellbeing Choir, which provides support for people living with dementia. It was able to hire professional singers trained in dementia inclusion to lead that group. Nurture Steps is a project funded to run support sessions for parents of young children with disabilities. And Veterans Tribes Scotland were supported on a significant project to reduce isolation, loneliness and anxiety amongst those who have served our country. There were funds allocated to maintain a community playing field at Dunbog Community Hall. And in the late summer, I hope to go to the Cooper Big Weekend, and I know that it has been supported by charity lotteries. I could go on. There are also countless projects such as the Cooper Food Bank to local brownie units who receive funding from their central bodies, the Trussell Trust and Girl Guiding, which also comes from charity lotteries. But I know I'm happy to give way to my honourable friend.
I thank her for giving way, and I commend her for bringing this bill before the House and all her work she's done to promote charity lotteries. Does she agree with me that in addition to all of the organisations she's listed in her own constituency, the MS Therapy Centre in Milton Park, Chiltern County Primary School and the Letcombe Brook project in my Oxfordshire constituency of Didcot and Wantage have also benefited and would benefit further if this bill progresses?
Thank you to my honourable friend for giving way. I think you have just exemplified what I said earlier in my speech, that every single one of us, in fact we've all attended drop-ins probably in Parliament, have seen the benefit of charity lotteries and what they do for our local communities. But we know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that fundraising is not a one-off thing, and there will have been other projects that weren't successful in getting funding or all the funding that they needed because it hasn't been available under the current system. I'd like to bring in some of those charities' voices directly. And I hope the Minister is aware that before Christmas over 100 charity leaders wrote to the Prime Minister asking them to support my bill. They point to the absurdity of charity fundraising being restricted, and they note further, and I have to agree, that supporting this vital reform would send a strong message on the Labour Government's backing for and belief in the third sector and a vibrant, well-funded society. I want to just highlight one of the signatories of the letter, Children's First, who I spoke with earlier this week, where they said, in a financial climate that is more challenging than ever, we rely on charity fundraising to deliver the essential services we provide to children and families across the country. And importantly, and I think this is a very important point, Madam Deputy Speaker, the unrestricted nature of the funding means that we are more able to use the money in the most effective way for children and families, bridging gaps in the ever-complex funding environment. Many of our services rely on a jigsaw of income, sometimes stretching to 20 different sources with all the conditions, data gathering and reporting requirements. This in turn has an impact on how much we can do for the children and families we support, as time and energy is locked into sustaining funding as opposed to supporting families.
Was my honourable friend give way?
I'm happy to give way.
Thank you. You talk about the financial pressures that charities face. In West Berkshire, the West Berkshire Volunteer Centre have said that charities in West Berkshire will need to find an additional £383,000 next year just to stand still because of the increase to minimum wage and, of course, the national insurance contributions. So with the government causing charities concern through national insurance, would you agree with me that your bill allows them to ameliorate some of that harm?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention. Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. And indeed, in a Westminster Hall debate just last week where the Shadow Minister spoke, I actually highlighted just that very thing, that the national insurance increase is going to be hurting charities, and actually here is an opportunity for the government, through my bill, to ameliorate some of that. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we understand that technical barriers place limits on the way that charity lotteries fund, and we support the calls to remove that cap. That's what Children's First said. And there are about 170,000 charities across the UK. And of course, not all of them want or need charity funding, but many, many thousands of them do. There is many reasons why this House should support the bill and its provisions, and I do understand some of the government's concerns. I've been told that they are worried of the impact on the National Lottery, considering the Secretary of State does have a statutory obligation to maximise its success. But I would argue that there is no evidence to suggest that there is a detrimental impact on the National Lottery from charity lotteries. And indeed, the Gambling Commission have investigated this 3 times in the last 15 years, most recently in October 2017, finding that there is no statistically significant effect of charity lotteries affecting National Lottery sales. And this has been confirmed again in 2022 in an impact assessment by Regulus partners. Indeed, my goal with this bill is to keep the distinct nature of the National Lottery by protecting its much larger prize pots. This weekend, playing the Lotto's prize is £4 million, while the Euro Millions is £83 million. And in changing the law on sales, as I've already covered, we want to change the current price cap to keep the maximum prize at £500,000. It is a very different ballgame, and indeed supports the evidence that players of one lottery often play the other in addition. And I know that the Government is waiting updated research, and I would suggest that the Government could choose to progress my bill today and consider that research at committee or later stages. But in my conversations with the Minister, I understand that the Government is determined to hold their current position, that they want to see this evidence first. But I do hope at the dispatch box she will confirm the following commitments to me: that she will update the House and make that research public when it is received, that she will update the House on the Government's review of the research before the summer recess, and she will set out at that time any legislative action the Government is prepared to make. And I know that the Minister supported these reforms when she was in opposition, and that she is therefore sympathetic to the purpose of the bill. And I'm sure she's aware of the money charities in her constituency have benefited from and will continue to do. And indeed, the Station Community Association from her constituency notes the following in their project description: "This grant has supported our running costs. Just like everyone else, all our bills have increased and we need to cover those costs." And as my honourable friend, the member for Newbury, highlighted, this is something that we hear everywhere, particularly now that charities are faced with the additional costs of national insurance contributions. Increased fundraising to counterbalance these additional costs is going to be increasingly vital over this year and years ahead if charitable projects that we all champion are going to survive. This bill offers a way for the Government to support this, and at no cost to the taxpayer. It's a win-win in my view. But before I finish, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just like to touch on gambling harms. I'm a strong believer in reform to the sector to protect people from problem gambling. Public Health England said that there are more than 400 gambling-related suicides a year, and the overall cost across the UK is £1.4 billion. Extrapolation of this data by Gambling Lives with Life suggests that up to 650 gambling-related suicides take place across the UK each year. My party want to see a compulsory levy on gambling companies to fund research, education and treatment, restrictions on advertising and the establishment of a gambling ombudsman. The seriousness of addictive problem gambling cannot be underestimated. And I want to outline the steps, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the People's Postcode Lottery, for example, take in this regard. Players sign up to a monthly subscription to be entered into the draws. The number of monthly subscriptions for a single player is limited, and draws take place throughout the month with results published accordingly. Whereas one of the most influential factors in the development of gambling problems is the ability to gamble in real time over and over again. Charity lotteries do not allow real-time gambling, taking away the ability to chase a perceived high. And indeed, lotteries are widely recognised as being a distinct and low-risk game in comparison to other forms of gambling. And that's why, to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I feel confident that there are only benefits to the bill before the House today, benefits to the charity sector facing unprecedented pressures, benefits to local charities and community projects, and ultimately benefits to all of our constituents. Thank you.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the Shadow Minister, Jo Robertson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. It's a pleasure to be speaking on behalf of His Majesty's loyal opposition on this important matter. And may I congratulate the honourable member in bringing forward this bill today. She's spoken with passion and knowledge on an issue she clearly knows much and cares much about. I would also thank her for supporting my Westminster Hall debate on a related and very important issue for charities, the impact of national insurance increases brought about by this government. Now, the honourable member's simple and well-intentioned aim behind this bill is, of course, to allow charities to raise more money to deliver on their charitable aims, and she seeks to do this by disposing of the limits imposed by the Gambling Act. She's already referred to the People's Postcode Lottery, and we have already heard how much it does to support charities in our constituencies right up and down the country, including in my own constituency on the Isle of Wight. And who would not want to support charities like the People's Postcode Lottery? Now, the leading argument against restricting the cap on charity lotteries is that they might then compete with the National Lottery, which of course is not subject to this cap. Now, that is a legitimate concern. It's in the interests of all of us that the National Lottery continues to thrive. But there has been research done on the issue of competition between charity lotteries and the National Lottery. In 2017, the Gambling Commission found no statistically significant effect of charity lotteries affecting national lottery sales. Indeed, it remarked that the National Lottery and society lotteries have continued to grow side by side. Consequently, the previous Conservative government partially liberalised charity lottery sales prize limits in 2020. 2 years later, the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee took evidence on the matter, and in its subsequent report, What Next for the National Lottery, it said, "We do not consider that society lotteries pose a threat to the charitable giving of the National Lottery, in line with the views of the Gambling Commission and the Department." On these benches, we are supportive of the principle of allowing charities to raise more money, including from society lotteries, and reduce the regulatory burden placed upon them. The previous government commissioned independent research, as the honourable member has referred to, and she asked some questions of the Minister, and I endorse those questions. I wonder also whether the Minister is able to say whether the research has been received at the Department and whether she can give an indication of its summary. Before finishing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to say just something very briefly about the importance of the work that charities do, delivering £17 billion of public services each year, without which the public sector could not do its work either. This government bears greater responsibility to support charities through additional fundraising than might otherwise have been the case. And that is because it's taking an estimated £1.4 billion from charities through its increases on national insurance contributions in the budget. The government knows that that will do damage to the public services that charities deliver, and that's why it exempted the NHS. But it provided no such exemption for charities, that is, charities delivering health and social care, charities supporting people who need housing, charities trying to lift people out of poverty, and charities who are trying to cure disease, charities supporting victims of violence against women and girls. So I urge the government to act. It owes charities a support, and it owes charities compensation for the money it's taking off them in extra tax. This is just a start. I thank the honourable member again for bringing this important issue before this House, and I wish her every success in realising the aims and objectives behind this bill.
Oh, Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the member for North East Fife for bringing forward this private member's bill. I think we would all recognise across this House what this bill is trying to achieve and agree that the government should look at a review into this. I also want to thank her for her recognition of the harms of gambling. I have got friends who I know are recovering gambling addicts, and I know what a huge damaging impact it has had on their lives. I want to take a moment, if I may, just to recognise some of the charities in my constituency, many of which I've had first-hand experience of working with. I will mention very briefly Streets to Homes, a homeless charity which I had the honour of working for, that supported homeless people, rough sleepers and the hidden homeless in Harlow. Action for Family Carers, a speech doesn't go by without me mentioning young carers in this place. Raised Roof, an inclusive theatre company which I had the pleasure of visiting yesterday, that ensure adults with learning difficulties not only have the opportunity to socialise but to really thrive and be a huge part of the community. I'm looking forward to their performance at the Holocaust Memorial Day service on Sunday. I will mention very quickly YCT, another charity that I'm a trustee of, who provide counselling support to young people in my constituency. The problem, Madam Deputy Speaker, when you mention charities in your constituency is there's always a danger you'll miss one out, and I'm sure I'll get an email later. So very quickly, Livewire, Butterfly Effect, Wellbeing, Rainbow Services, and of course mentioned by the honourable member for North East Fife, the Michael Roberts Charitable Trust. Very briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to talk about my issues with funding for charities, if I may, having worked in the charity sector myself. Quite often when charities look at getting funding, that funding is quite often very short term and also requires funding organisations always talk about new projects and fail to recognise that actually quite a lot of charities just need ongoing funding for the important work that they already do. And I would really emphasise the importance of looking at that. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll finish by just quoting my favourite Prime Minister, and disagreeing with him, controversially. He once said... Which one? Well, you'll work it out by the quote. Charity is a cold, grey, loveless thing. I think we'd all agree that we live in a very different world to the one where Clement Attlee was Prime Minister. And actually, the charities in my constituency of Harlow do a great deal of important work. I know that, I've been part of that myself, but I think we would all agree that the way that they are funded needs to be looked at, and I look forward to hearing the response from the Minister where she can talk through that.
Yeah.
I call the Minister.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for North East Fife for bringing forward this motion. Society lotteries provide vital funding for hundreds of charities, community groups and sports clubs. Indeed, I've seen the impact in my own constituency of Barnsley South, where society lotteries, like the People's Postcode Lottery, are benefiting great local causes, from Dial supporting disabled people to Magic Breakfast, which provides kids with a meal to start the school day. And it is in this context that the Government has a very clear message that we want society lotteries to thrive. In the interest of time, I want to make sure I am very clear from the outset that there is a clear commitment from this Government to update the House on our position with regards to society lotteries by the summer recess once we are in receipt of the independent research, which I will come on to discuss if there is time. We are not yet in receipt of the final research, but we understand that will be here by the end of next month, and I will make that very clear commitment today to update the House by the summer recess, and we've of course had discussions to that effect. As members will know, there have long been mandatory conditions and limits on sales and prizes for society lotteries. These have been reviewed and adjusted before, most recently by the previous Government, who introduced new sales limits for society lotteries, increasing the annual ticket sales limit fivefold from £10 million to £50 million. And of course, umbrella lottery organisations may also operate with multiple licences. So, for example, the People's Postcode Lottery currently hold 20 operator licences and are therefore able to sell a combined total of £1 billion worth of tickets each year. Now, of course, I do acknowledge the strength of feeling behind the proposal in this bill to remove the annual sales limits for society lotteries, and I would like to speak very briefly about some of the factors the Government will consider when considering potential reform. So, of course, we have to reflect on where the sector is now and where it may be in the future. The current picture is broadly positive, with the recent evidence showing that society lotteries continue to grow in popularity since the limits were changed in 2020. The vast majority of society lotteries are also currently operating well within existing limits. The Government does, however, recognise the challenge for large-scale umbrella lotteries, some of which have multiple licences for multiple trusts, and we know a small number of these may reach a limit within the following year, and that there are costs associated to operating this. We don't take this lightly, but it is worth noting that the current system does not hinder overall sales of society lottery tickets for these organisations. Further to that, with our support for lotteries raising as much money as possible is of course unwavering, and we're also keen to better understand how the growth in sales is translating into the investment for good causes. The current picture suggests that higher sales has not led to an equivalent increase in funding for good causes, and there may be room to improve this. Of course, the second element is, of course, the research that I have referenced. The current evidence and data shows that society lotteries are growing in popularity and revenue, and of course the Government has commissioned independent research into the lotteries market as a whole to help us strengthen that evidence base ahead of any further review of limits. This research as... Order. Debate to be resumed what day?
11th July 2025, Madam Deputy Speaker.
11th of July 2025.